primary goal of the Foundation for Sustainable Forest is land protection. And it's achieving land protection through working forest. That's the goal anyway. And this comes, what this is about. I mean, we can mention some forestry within this session, but I really want to emphasize the way land use is being approached and how it's changing. So if you look at the 1876 Atlas, these were a lot of small farms. Now we can assume this is Erie County. We're still probably mostly dairy farms. If you go into Crawford or Warren, definitely they would have been mostly dairy farms. Here, there would have been, crops. We've had the grape region here for a long time. There's no grapes grown here, I'm sure. You'll see that this is a 106-acre property circled here. The boundary lines are the same today as they were in 1876. The change has been in 1939, where we have the aerial photographs. This property was probably over half of it was open field and pasture. This area, the sugar maple, this valley, and this was wood. This, I think, has always been wooded. Just a little bit to the north, it was pastured. Where we had our forestry walk in the morning, it was field. It was cultivated field. There's an old road that if you saw it in the woods, you'd say it was a logging road. It's actually a farm road. It's just over this little knoll here. It goes over, and that's where they entered that field back there. I don't think it was a dairy farm, because we'll go past where the foundations of the old buildings were. What I'm assuming was the barn from that building was still there in the 1939 photograph. It was very small. It was just too small to have had cattle. It might have had a couple horses in there. So I don't know what the economic basis of this farm was. It was a poor farm. The fields are very wet. Some poor subsistence farmer lived here, and he didn't do well. I'm confident of that. And so it was abandoned probably in the 1930s. We can say that the Depression probably took care of this farm. And also at that time, it came up for sale, so the Zenchenko family bought it. And that's Diane. And this property is now owned 75% by the Foundation for Sustainable Forest and 25% by Diane. And we bought part of Diane's interest, so it's now a partnership between the Foundation and Diane. But it's set up so that the property is never going to be subdivided. This is what you see is what you're going to get. It's going to remain a 106-acre working forest as long as the government of the United States can remain here to protect our title. But what I'm getting at is it's unique because of the Zenchenko family. It's just a coincidence that they bought this property. They may have bought this property or who knows what. But this has essentially remained intact for that 80 years and remained intact prior to that as a subsistence farm. So if you look at, then you go to one of these other maps, and it doesn't matter. The one that's a lighter color is a 1987 plat book. The other one is a 2015 plat book. But the huge changes occurred here in the 60s and 70s. And that's essentially when Erie County just got chopped up into little bitty pieces. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that Erie County had a zoning ordinance. If you had 10 acres or more, all you needed was a septic tank, and that was the septic years. So, if you had particularly properties in Erie County that had a considerable amount of frontage, it got chopped up into these long, skinny 10-acre lots. And you can see a lot of that here, and that was the predominant land use of Erie County. The dairy farms have disappeared. I doubt if there's a dairy farm left on this map. Maybe I'm wrong, but if there's any left, it's 1 or 2 at the most. So we still have, the farms along Lake Erie, the grapes and the fruit, but the dairy farms are gone. They're not coming back. And we've got this pattern, and we've gone from this pattern to this pattern. And here is, whether it's controversial, I got a shirt, I guess I'd have to take my other shirt off, but there is a quote on the back of that shirt from Aldo Leopold. It says, "Anything is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise." That is a moral statement. But our legal system in relation to land is based on something called highest and best use. If there is a controversy regarding some property, and then it's an inheritances or whatever, that property is appraised for whatever brings the most money. What brings the most money is it, and that in our legal system that is called highest and best use. Aldo Leopold simply would turn over in his grave at that phrase, and that's what we wanted to get a discussion, or I wanted to get a discussion here of land use and how it relates, a system of ethics versus our legal system. So we could have a disputed argument with some people on this subject.
It depends on who's interpreting what's highest and best use.
No, our legal system interprets highest and best use as to whatever brings the most money. That's right. That's absolutely.
That's right, but that's an interpretation.
That's a legal interpretation.
Right.
Through the court system, that's the way it
That's
comes out.
because we don't put any value on what this does for us as a species, as a planet.
Precisely.
Exactly. So that's the challenge to us, is to change our legal system to recognize the inherent value of the biota and the negative, what do they call externalities of fossil fuel use, for example, that don't show up anywhere in that cost equation, and yet they're costing us all tremendous amounts every day.
Yes, and so there's no absolutist right answer to this question, but we can see the direction that we're heading in and all the pitfalls, what I envision the foundation is standing for, and hopefully what it continues to stand for. And we're using this working forest concept to provide the income to support these properties. This property will support itself forever with no problem from the income from the logging. I mean, it'll support this property plus some others along with it. And so that's doable. But it's over the very, very long term. If we're looking down the road hundreds and hundreds of years, it very well may be the most practical use of this land. Whereas the highest and best use of this land is definitely development. No question. That's what the system will say. Because this isn't it's a relatively high value. I mean, it's a very desirable area for building McMansions. And and look at the quality of the tree growing ability of this land. That's the ethical basis. Now we want to get a discussion, and in the problem, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but we'll take a walk down here and we'll see what's happened. Where we're standing, is probably pasture. There's a fence all the way around the property. I can't find the internal fences that would separate the wooded areas from the fields, but they were probably there at one time. So this was probably just pasture land. Maybe there's parts in the back of the property that there's a fence clear on the south line, but it may have been fenced off because it's wet, it's wooded. It may have simply been the source for firewood. There's quite a few locusts planted. I'm sure they were planted right there. There's two right there. There's several areas where one of those old subsistence farmers planted locusts for fence posts. At least right now the foundation has 913 acres. By the end of this year, we'll have probably doubled that. We're getting 2 large acquisitions. I think we'll be approaching 2,000 acres by the end of this year. And we have the bequest that we're going to get more. So we're going to make that goal. And so when I said this is self-supporting, yes, this will pay the taxes. This will already pay any taxes. We see that frontier spirit as independence. You know, we can overcome all our problems, and we can also treat land as a commodity. So that's our heritage. It's good and bad. What happened here? Diane inherited the property in the early 1990s. She had an art gallery on 26th Street at that time, and there was a fellow named Pete Fair, a Mennonite, whom she bought framing from for her pictures. And so Pete Fair introduced myself to Diane, and that's when we did the first logging operation here. And that's when we built this road in order to get to the back, so we could log it with horses. Then I think we're going to say 2008, as close as we can guess, Diane decided to sell a part of the property to the foundation. And then about in 2012, the foundation decided that Diane's sister also had an interest in it, and we decided to buy Diane's sister out. So now the property is owned 25% by Diane and 75% by the foundation, so that she'll maintain her family's connection with the property, and the foundation is responsible for protecting it.